Imagine if everything you thought you knew about where a people came from, their deepest origins, was maybe built on shaky ground. Like, what if the map tracing those ancient journeys was basically upside down? Today, we're diving into the really fascinating, sometimes pretty controversial ideas of historian Kyösti Julku. His work basically flipped the script on how we think about the origins of people in the North. It challenges us, to rethink thousands of years. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, absolutely. Our mission today is really to get grips with Julku's core arguments. What was his evidence, and why do his ideas, his working hypotheses, still offer such a valuable sort of compass for understanding early history? We want to keep Julku himself right on stage, could say. Explore not just what he said, but the thinking behind it. His real strength, I think, was asking those tough questions and just not settling for the easy answers.
And we've got a great set of sources discussing his ideas, which is fantastic. It lets us go straight to the heart of his thinking, really, without getting too bogged down in, academic side roads. It's almost like having a direct line to how he thought things through. So let's start with maybe his most striking idea, the Ukrainian refugium. What did he actually mean by that term? Why was it such a radical idea?
It really is transformative.
Yeah.
Because it shifts the whole starting point. Julku saw this Ukrainian refugium as a kind of safe zone, a survival area during the Ice Age. Think about Fennoscandia, Finland, Scandinavia, parts of Russia, was under this massive ice sheet, so populations couldn't just, vanish. Julku argued they retreated south to this survival zone. He put it very clearly. The starting point for Finns can be assumed to be the Ukrainian refugium. So the core idea isn't people popping up out of nowhere in the north once the ice melted. It's that they returned. They migrated north again from this southern refuge. And crucially, he said, they used ancient water routes.
Wow, okay. That's a huge shift in perspective, isn't it? Moving the origin point thousands of kilometers south and then tracing a return journey, not just like a local start. That must have really stirred things up when he first proposed it. I mean, it goes against a lot of standard thinking.
Oh, absolutely. It forced everyone to consider a completely different scenario than the usual kind of linear, often east to west migration narratives. But Julku didn't just throw the idea out there. He built a framework for it. He kept stressing that, early history cannot be built on linguistics alone. For him, understanding the past needed, multiple angles. A blend of archaeology, geology, anthropology, religious studies, and later, he would have loved this, genetics. The key thing, though, was using them together, in parallel, cross-checking the findings constantly.
That approach sounds powerful. How did that insistence on converging evidence really change things for historical research back then? What did it let Julku see that maybe others missed by sticking to just one field?
It was pretty revolutionary for its time, yeah. Instead of letting one field, maybe linguistics, dominate the whole story, Julku pushed for this holistic view. And that let him spot, inconsistencies or gaps in theories based on just one discipline. More importantly, it allowed him to build arguments that were tougher, more resilient, because they drew strength from different independent lines of evidence. He was trying to see the whole forest, not just one type of tree.
Right. That holistic view must have been key for tackling those big established ideas. Did this multidisciplinary thing directly feed into his big challenge to the east to west migration story, the one often linked to the Volga Bend?
Yes, exactly. That approach was the very tool he used to take apart that particular narrative. And Julku didn't mince words. He stated pretty boldly, the migration from the Volga Bend to the west is thus a myth. He wasn't just questioning it, he was systematically dismantling it. He looked across all those fields, archaeology, geology, anthropology, and basically said, look, there's no consistent converging evidence for a clear starting point there, or a single migration route, or even strong push-pull factors driving this supposed mass movement. Without that solid cross-disciplinary proof, he argued, it's just a story, not actual history.
Okay, so if the classic east-west story from the Volga Bend was, in his view, a myth, what did he see as the real pathways? How did the Ukrainian refugium idea explain the repopulation of the North?
Well, he essentially flipped the whole axis. Instead of east-west, he focused on south-north. If he dismissed that Volga route, what he pointed to instead were river systems, waterways. These were the ancient highways for the return from the south. He pictured this really long timeline, going way back, Ice Age maximum, populations pull back into refugia, Ukraine being key. Then, as the ice retreats, slowly, things move north again. Animals, plants, and then humans following from the south. And he wasn't vague about it. He identified specific water routes. Like, think of it at work connecting the Vistula, Oder, Nemon, Daugava rivers, then linking up to big northern lakes like Ladoga and Onega via the Sierra River, and even stretching further toward the White Sea, using rivers like the northern Dvina. Julku's point was, these weren't just lines on a map, they were real infrastructure, integrated systems of rivers and lakes that acted as the main arteries for moving people, setting up settlements, spreading technology, customs, everything.
Ancient superhighways, that's a really vivid image. It makes you rethink how connected the ancient world might have been, doesn't it? We sometimes imagine these isolated groups, but this paints a picture of, well, constant flow and exchange. It makes the North seem much less cut off than maybe we assume. What does that mean for how cultures might have developed along those routes?
It's a huge shift in how we see it. It means cultures weren't just bubbling up in isolation. These waterways were channels for, well, everything. Trade goods, new tools, pottery styles, maybe language elements, certainly genes. The North, instead of being some remote backwater, becomes a destination within this huge dynamic network, constantly interacting, adapting ideas from the South.
Okay, so to back up such a, well, revolutionary claim, Julku needed solid evidence. What were the main pillars, you could say, that he relied on? And how do they stack up against what we know now from modern research?
He actually pointed to 3 really strong converging lines of evidence. And it's fascinating how modern stuff, especially genetics, kind of backs up his thinking. So, first, language and place names. Specifically what's called hydronymy, the names of rivers and lakes. Julku highlighted this clear Uralic substratum. That's like an older layer of language buried in place names, suggesting influence from people who were there earlier. He found this in tons of river and lake names across northern Russia and Karelia. This isn't just, a linguistic quirk. It suggests really deep, long-term local continuity of some early population, even if the main spoken language changed later on. It's like linguistic fossils in the landscape. Second, and this is where he'd probably feel quite vindicated today, is genetics. Julku would have been, I think, pretty pleased with current genetic findings. He would have pointed to the high frequency of Y chromosome N, especially N1C, in northern paternal lines, and also the ancient U5 and U4 maternal lineages common in the north. These are specific genetic markers, right, like tracking ancient family names. They fit really well with a picture of early northern continuity and a return from those southern refugias. He probably would have said something like, see, this supports doesn't prove it alone, mind you, but it supports my hypothesis.
Yeah.
And third was material culture, archaeology. Julku looked closely at settlement patterns, noticing how they hugged the coasts and rivers. He saw the wide spread of the comb ceramic culture, named for its pottery decoration. That spread was huge. He also looked at things like communal houses, seeing them as smart, practical adaptations to the tough northern climate. For him, these were the footprints, the physical evidence of that return journey from the south.
So it wasn't just one thing. It was language, genetics, archaeology, all kind of pointing in a similar direction. Did that convergence make his theory stronger than maybe earlier ideas that relied on just one type of evidence?
Absolutely. That was the core strength of his argument, the convergence. When you have linguistic traces suggesting one path, genetic markers reinforcing it, and archaeological finds that fit the pattern, the whole argument just becomes much more compelling, much more robust than any single piece of evidence could be on its own. It's how you build a solid historical case, really.
Now, beyond that solid evidence, Julku wasn't afraid to push things further, was he? He talked about testing throws. What were some of those more speculative ideas he put out there? What was the point?
Oh, definitely. He'd like to push the boundaries, using those testing throws, as he called them. Ideas meant more to provoke thought than to be final answers. For instance, he sort of floated the idea that the Swudry culture, an old archaeological culture, might represent an early Finnish layer in that area. Or he suggested that the eastward spread of another group, the Brahm culture, couldn't just be chalked up to a language conflict if the underlying population was already speaking something Proto-Uralic. And then there was his idea of an X-people, some unknown group, not Basque, not Uralic, that might have influenced early Germanic languages. Now, he knew these were speculative. He wasn't claiming them as fact. But the purpose behind these throws was, as he put it, to force a broader perspective, to shake things up, get people to look at the data differently, explore possibilities beyond the usual assumptions.
Even if they were speculative, there's a certain value in that, isn't there? Putting out unconventional ideas to make people think. Though maybe risky, too. Take some guts, especially in academia.
Huge value, I think, because it forced a closer look at the evidence. It challenged others to either properly refute his throws or, maybe more importantly, consider alternatives they hadn't thought of before. The risk, is that speculation gets taken as fact, but Julku seemed pretty clear these were provisional starting points for discussion, not the final word. Mental experiments, almost.
So Julku was always challenging assumptions about migration, about evidence. How did that apply to his view of the North itself? Places like Kainununma or Kvenland, he didn't see it as just some remote fringe, did he?
Not at all. He saw Kvenland, or Kvenland, as a really vital northern hub. In his view, it was a place of permanent Finnish settlement, controlling key trade routes with active commerce buzzing across the Gulf of Bothnia. His main message here was a direct challenge to seeing the North as just a margin, a periphery. He argued strongly for it being an active actor, a dynamic center in its own right, with its own influence, its own agency. And yeah, he knew some researchers were skeptical about giving Kvenland that much importance, but Julku's response was clear. The northern center is just as real as southern centers. He just wouldn't accept relegating the North to some secondary status.
That's a really important point, fundamentally reshaping how we see peripheral regions. What do we lose, historically speaking, when we overlook the dynamism of these so-called margins?
We lose a lot, actually. When you dismiss a region as peripheral, you risk missing crucial historical developments, unique ways people adapted, significant contributions that actually shape the bigger picture. You also end up with a biased, often center-focused view of history that just flattens out how complex and rich human experience really is. Julku's work is a great reminder that agency and importance aren't just found in the traditional centers.
Thinking about all the advances since Julku's time, especially in archaeology and genetics, if he were here today and we showed him the latest genetic maps, N1C, U5, U4 distributions, what do you think his reaction would be? And what kind of caution might he offer?
Good question. His response would probably be measured, but I suspect deeply interested. He'd likely say something like, yes, genetics can show some connections. He'd probably feel pleased seeing how N1C confirms that northern Russian and Uralic paternal link he suspected, and how U5, U4 fits with that ancient northern presence supporting the idea of long continuity. But then, and this is the key Julku part, he would almost certainly follow up with his core message. Okay, interesting, but don't make genetics the only map. Put language, put archaeology, put climate studies, put ritual traditions right there next to it. He wouldn't let genetics become the new single dominant story any more than linguistics was before. It would be another crucial piece, yes, but just one piece of his multidisciplinary puzzle.
That really makes you think about how we build historical stories, doesn't it? What are the dangers if we don't take that kind of multi-angled approach, if we lean too hard on just one map?
Well, the biggest danger is getting a skewed picture, maybe even a completely wrong one. If you rely only on genetics, you might miss cultural shifts that language reveals. Rely only on language, you miss population movements genetics can show. Archaeology alone can be ambiguous. It's only when you see different independent lines of evidence pointing the same way converging that you start to build a really robust, reliable understanding of the past. Julku knew that any single lens, however powerful, always has blind spots.
So if we boil it all down, what's Julku's most important legacy? What's the compass he left us that still helps guide how we look at history today?
I think his legacy has several key parts. First, highlighting the importance of that south-north axis, showing it's just as significant historically as the east-west one we often focus on. Second, the whole concept of the Ukrainian refugium, leading to a return north via those water routes. That's a major framework. Third, his insistence on viewing northern regions not as passive margins, but as active centers of agency, shaping their own destiny and influencing others. And maybe overarching all of that is his relentless commitment to that multidisciplinary approach. The idea that you have to bring all these different fields together to get a proper understanding of history. His work isn't the final answer, He called them working hypotheses. But it's an absolutely excellent compass for navigating this complex history. It pushes us to ask better questions, look beyond the obvious, and always seek that richer converging evidence.
A compass for future journeys into the past. That's a great way to think about it. Challenging us to always dig deeper. Thank you so much for walking us through Kyösti Julku's world. It's been really enlightening. And for you, listening in. The next time you hear about ancient migrations or people's origins, maybe think about those massive ice sheets retreating. Think about rivers as ancient highways. And consider the possibility of a totally different kind of journey, not just east or west, but maybe north from a far-off southern refuge. Here's something to mull over. How might that idea, a deep southern origin, followed by this long return journey and adaptation over centuries, how might that change our understanding of the resilience, the cultural strength, and the unique innovations of northern peoples throughout history? Something to think about.